Now, Garland Nixon is the savviest of all American commentators, and I'm very glad to say he joins us again now. Welcome back to the show, Garland. Let me bowl you left field, if I may, about the gold. I'm intrigued that Donald Trump keeps talking about Fort Knox. Is it going to turn out that being as safe as Fort Knox isn't actually all that safe? Is the American gold in Fort Knox? What's Trump on about?
Well, I suspect that the issue of gold is very important in the new monetary policy that Donald Trump and, of course, his very powerful and wealthy supporters are planning to make adjustments to. So, whether or not there's something, amiss in Fort Knox, and whether there's not quite as much gold as there's supposed to be there, it's hard to know that, but I think it is critical. We can see that Musk is looking through the Treasury. We can see that the United States government now is trying to shift from money coming in via taxes, which a lot of people don't understand this. The Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, has the power of the purse for tax dollars. If the government switches to bringing money in by tariffs, that goes into the Treasury, and there's an argument to be made that the executive then has, fairly a powerful ability to control all of that money, and it won't be as restricted by the Congress. So I think there's monetary policy being changed, and whether or not the gold is there is critical to find out how that the new monetary policy will be enforced. So we can't really know that, but it's a big part of his plans. That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry to dwell on it, but if I may, if it's not there, where could it be? Or have they been lying about the amount of gold that they had for some nefarious purpose?
Well, yeah, I think if it's not there, then there's going to have to be investigations done as to what happened to it over the course of time. The same way I think there's going to have to be questions about, the city of London, where their gold is and where that's disappeared to over time. I think it's an important question that has to be answered. And you also have to suspect that if the Trump people are asking that question, that maybe they already know at least part of the answer.
Exactly. So, if I understood you correctly, is that the reason why Trump's new word is tariffs? But these tariffs are paid by the consumer in the United States. I mean, if you put a 20% tariff on something I'm selling you, then you'll pass it on to your customer. So it's inflationary at a time when you can't get eggs for less than $1 each in the U.S.
Well, it gets pretty deep if you're chasing it down. But here's the bottom line. A tariff is actually paid at the port of entry. So when you ship goods into the U.S., whoever's shipping them in, this company will pay the tariff at that point, which will then, of course, be passed on to the consumer. However, the countries that are paying these excessive tariffs now will have to hold more dollars, which means they'll have to buy T-bills. And that means that actually there's an argument to be made that it'll strengthen the dollar. If you got to pay tariffs for everything that goes into the United States, you have to hold more dollars. And how do you get more dollars? You buy more treasury bills from the United States. Now, of course, there's a long road you can chase that to, where eventually that can cause problems. But I think the Trump people understand that in the short term, a big part that has two effects. Number one is now the money coming into the government goes into the Treasury instead of tax dollars, and the executive branch has much more discretion over money in the Treasury than it does tax dollars, which are controlled by Congress. And number two, it's going to, at least in the short term, strengthen the dollar. So it's complicated economically. I've been chasing this down, but it isn't quite as simple as it looks.
Now, you and I are vaguely on the same political page, and we vaguely had the same attitude to one Bernie Sanders. But I saw him today talking live to a very different crowd to the crowd he used to talk to, in which he was demanding more war with Russia, more weapons into the war machine against Russia. This Bernie Sanders can't be the same man that you and I used to support, can he?
Well, he can, but I think one of the things that Americans are learning, and one of the reasons that the Democratic Party is in such a downward spiral, is that you can't. The party that is in power should be the party of the people, the party of the working class, and you cannot be the party of the working class unless you're the party of peace, particularly in a country with 900 bases and $1 trillion budget. The reason we can't have good things, as they say, which would be a strong social safety net, is because all of the money goes into war making. So the Bernie Sanders and his ilk now are demonstrating that for all of the time that they've argued that they were standing on behalf of the working class, the working poor, and the poor, they were really playing both sides of the fence, that it was all a fraud, because he would have to argue for less war and argue to lower the military budget so that money could be used for the people. And Bernie Sanders is clearly a fraud. And when it came down to it, when Bernie Sanders had to make a decision, he's been exposed.
Yeah, it's bitterly disappointing. We had him on our wall of fame, and we took him off it some time ago. But I thought his speech today marked a new low. But let's look at who's actually in power now in the United States. And the St. Valentine's Day massacre that J.D. Vance issued to the assembled European panjandrums. On the 14th of February, the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain and the European continent was effectively massacred. He could not have been more harsh to the faces of these European leaders. And now it would appear, I mean, I worked all my life for this, Garland, for an anti-American uprising in Europe. But now that there is an anti-American uprising in Europe, it's America that's right and the Europeans that are wrong. And thus, I said to my old mother, age 90 yesterday, she said something about me, you'll not get into the United States. I said, I'm now the most pro-American political figure in the United Kingdom, which is actually more or less true. So do they mean it? What are they going to do about it? Are they going to be dissuaded by these barking poodles and chihuahuas? Or are they really going for a peace agreement with Russia?
Well, I think we're looking at, it's kind of like when you go to dinner with a friend and his wife and you look and you realize these people are going to get divorced soon. They just can't get along anymore. You see them argue over the whole dinner. That's what we're looking at. It's interesting that the Biden administration and the neocons have been going around the world, attacking and doing all kinds of terrible things and arguing that it was our values, quote, we lead with our values. And how ironic it is that the issue of values is the actual issue that is causing the breakup between the United States and the EU. That ultimately, when it comes down to it, there are people in the United States to a large extent that are concerned with the rights of the individual and the freedoms of the individual. We may, certainly have some significant disagreements with them, particularly when it comes to economic policy. But yet and still, there are people that say, we shouldn't. That government overreach is an issue. And to be quite frank, there is the appearance from this side of the pond that Europe is descending into this kind of a woke liberal totalitarianism, and it's quite distasteful. And we cannot continue to be, strongly but culturally associated with Europe based on the direction that Europe is going, and we're going in an opposite direction, returning more to our kind of roots, I would say.
So does a summit happen, and Trump agrees with Putin, a settlement, whether the Ukrainian regime and its Western European allies like it or not, and that's the done deal?
Well, recently, President Trump, just I think it was yesterday at the CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee, he gave a speech and he teased, and his others in his administration have teased that they may expect a settlement as early as this week. I think the important thing to remember is that as a result of, ironically, as a result of going along with the Biden administration, cutting themselves off from cheap Russian energy and other very important necessarily resources that Europe needs from Russia, the United States has considerably more leverage over the European countries than it had prior to the start of the conflict. So that Donald Trump, being a person that will use leverage if he has it, he can put enough leverage, I believe, economically on the European leaders to force them to either go in the direction that he wants or virtually crash their countries. I mean, if he simply says, we're, all of these things that you get from us, all of these things that you sell to us will be cut off. And furthermore, we have friends that you get, Algeria and Qatar, that you're still getting gas from. We'll talk to our friends and cut all of that up. He has the leverage if he chooses to use it to force Europe into compliance. The question, I think, is will the goons in the in Ukraine, are they actors that can be dealt with? What do you do with the people in Ukraine that are irrational and are, let's face it, neo-Nazis? So, but I do think that Europe can and will be forced into compliance. We're already seeing at the CPAC meeting, the leader of Duda, I believe, president or prime minister, whatever, of Poland was there. I believe President Fico was there. The leader, Prime Minister Maloney, spoke there. So we can see that there were people already jumping off the sinking ship of the EU, and I think it's just a matter of time before the rest of them get pressed into compliance, shall we say.
The Polish leader, Dudek, waited for an hour and a half and got a 10-minute meeting with Donald Trump. I mean, even I'm expecting a 10-minute meeting with Donald Trump, and I'm not the president of anywhere. I'm going to the victory celebrations in Moscow in May. Will I really be rubbing shoulders with Donald Trump, standing on top of Lenin's tomb, reviewing the victory parade on May the 9th in Moscow? Is Trump really going to go there? That would be a very big step.
Well, Donald Trump recently has said that he won't be going there, but I wouldn't rule it out because, I mean, the presidents say that, for instance, they're not going to pardon their sons, and then that happens. So, Donald Trump is saying now, he has said that he wants a deal by Easter, and interestingly enough, the traditional, I don't know what you call it, Easter and the Orthodox Easter both fall on the same day this year. So I suspect that he's looking for a deal soon, and that those things could change. Donald Trump, to be standing up front with President Trump, President Putin, and President Xi, who Trump recently referred to as his good friend, I think is a temptation of power that Donald Trump will find very, very, very difficult to resist and turn down.
Yeah, and he could even meet me there. It would be marvelous to see him. Finally, I see that Russia hasn't gone away. You would have thought that after the Hunter Biden laptop being exposed as both true and having been the subject of a high-level deep state cover-up, one of the biggest scandals in American history, involving 50 top intelligence people saying it was Russian propaganda and so on, only for it to turn out to be true. The Mueller inquiry producing zero, the Steele dossier producing zero. It hasn't gone away. I saw someone the other day, a former so-called NSA chief in Kazakhstan, who was presumably on the USAID payroll, singing for his supper, saying that the Russians recruited Donald Trump in 1987 when he was a real estate developer. It just shows you the KGB must have been very far-sighted people indeed. they recruited him and even gave him a code name. He's Agent Krasnov. So some call him President Trump. He'll always be Agent Krasnov to others. Does anyone take that seriously anymore?
No, it's kind of sad, and it's really, really embarrassing, and it just shows the level of desperation that the anti-Trump neocons have come to. I mean, there are plenty, as you know, as left-leaning people, we have plenty of areas where we could make legitimate criticisms of Donald Trump, and certainly in the things that he does that we agree with, we certainly support those. Some things that I think are great as far as foreign policy, but these people are so embarrassing. The good thing is that for the most part, they're on CNN or MSNBC, and since nobody's watching those channels anyway, if we don't discuss it on your channel, nobody would even know that it happened.
I stand chastened by that very wise advice. Garland Nixon, as always, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk shows. Absolutely brilliant.